Hey guys, welcome to kind of a week 3 walkthrough. I'm recording this early. I'm going to get it up right before I go to class here. This week we're going to talk about shape layers, operands for those shape layers, which are just kind of cool ways to affect them. We're going to talk about a little bit about parenting, and we're going to talk a little bit about smoothing out some of your animated keyframes. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to create a new composition. Make sure it's 1080, 30 frames per second is fine. You can do 720 if you want, but we'll do that. I'm just going to create a new background, so solid, name BG. I'll just set it to like a light blue or something. Sure, that works. Okay, so I got my background. Let's talk about shape layers. If I right-click and go to New, I have shape layer as an option here. There's a few different ways to create shape layers. You can do that. Or if you go up here, you have these rectangle and shape tools up here, right? If you don't have any layers selected down here, make sure we're clicked off of our background. You can take this and drag to create a new shape, right? There's a rectangle, rounded rectangle. There's ellipse, which is a circle. You can hold shift, and that will keep it nice and uniform. There's also polygon and star. You could make these up here, but you might run into a lot of problems. For instance, if you have this background checked and you draw one on, it creates a mask of that background. We haven't really gotten to masks yet, but it creates a mask of this layer instead of a new shape layer. So rather than running into that problem, the best way to probably do it is to right-click, go to New, go to Shape Layer. Okay. When you go to shape layer, you get contents and transform. The transform properties obviously are on every single layer. It's the thing we did in week 1. It's the opacity, anchor point, scale, position, rotation. We're going to focus on this contents. There's nothing in here right now because it's just an empty shape layer. There's nothing in its contents. If we go to add, we have a group which we can put multiple objects into one shape layer and group them together. These are the different shape layer types, so rectangle, ellipse, polystar, path, same thing that was up here. The fill effects, these are the color effects that you can add to them, so fill, stroke, gradient, fill, gradient, stroke. And then these are our operands, merge paths, offset paths, plucker and bloat, repeater, round corners, trim paths, twist, wiggle paths, wiggle transform, and zigzags. The things that we're going to focus on today are repeater and trim paths. I find they're the most useful. The other ones are a little bit more limited. You can do some cool things with them, but those are the ones I want to focus on today and that you'll be using in your homework. Actually, I don't think we use repeater much in the homework, but it's really cool and I want to show it to you anyway. So we have our shape layer made. Let's make a rectangle. And you can see it adds this blank box here, right? There's nothing here. There's no color. There's nothing. It's just the rectangle path. Once we do that, if we arrow down, we have size, position, roundness. So these are the 3 properties of a rectangle. We can scale this up. We can change its roundness of its corners and stuff like that. But we don't see anything. So I'm going to add a fill. Actually, let's add a stroke. I'm going to add a stroke, which is just the outer lining of this, the border of your object, if you're not familiar with stroke. And I will bring this up to, let's say, like 19. So here's our stroke options. You can make it with dashes, which is kind of cool. You can do lots of cool little things. You can affect those dashes. We'll talk about that more when we get into line effects. I'm going to scale this up just a bit. And let's create a little animation with this, and then we'll show you how the repeater comes in handy. So our stroke, I'm just going to create a really basic animation for this object, and then we're going to repeat it and have a whole bunch of rectangles do the exact same thing in a cool way. So let's just have this, we're going to have it scale, and we're going to affect its position, and we'll affect the stroke width. Let's do that. So we'll come over maybe about 20 frames here or so. I don't have page up, page down on my laptop, but page up, page down should move you forward by 10 frames. So if I just go over here and I type in 20, that'll take me to the 20th frame. I'm going to create keyframes on here too. This is going to be my, well, I'll make my ending point I want my stroke size to be this and my object size to be this, but I want my position to move up. So I'll go like up to here, okay? I guess my stroke width, let's see if we end that at 0. Yeah. Okay. Oops, actually I lied. Let's undo this. I think to do the position correctly, I think if we do that, we have to do a group. And we have to throw our path in the group and our stroke in the group. And that'll give us our transform properties for the group. So once you get your rectangle made, you, instead of using these transform properties down here, consider this transform property as like the entire layer. Since we're going to be having multiple things within this shape layer, we don't want to affect them all that way. So we want this transform group 1 to be our main transform one. So let's go back to we'll create our keyframes again. We're going to affect size. Oops, not position. Size. We'll do stroke width, and we will do position here. And we'll probably have to do scale here too, now that I think about it. So we'll create one at scale. And then I'm going to go up here, I'm going to hit U. So now it only shows the places I added my keyframes. I'll go to my 20th frame, which is a little less than a second. And I'll add new keyframes here. I'm going to bring this is going to be my ending spot. So I want it to end up here. I want it to end with 0 stroke. Okay, that looks good. I want it to start with a size of 0. Cool. So I have this cool little, like, I don't even know what you call that. Cool little animation, right? I think if I use scale, if I start my scale at 0 too, that's probably going to help me. Yeah, so if I had this, if I get rid of this, it doesn't really affect much. Let's leave that there and see. I'll bring this back to 100. We'll see if we need to do that later. I've had problems with it before, but so we'll really focus on size, stroke width, position. So we're starting in the middle at 0 position. We're starting with a nice thick border, and we're starting sized all the way down to 0. And our transition's moving it up. We're scaling it up to 150, or not scaling, it's 151 pixels wide and high. And then our position's moving up on the y-axis, right? So let's talk about smoothing out this animation. I'm going to zoom out, bring my work area bar so we can see it a little bit better. And I'll preview this. Okay, pretty flat. Let's talk about smoothing this out a little bit. These keyframes, these diamond keyframes, are linear point-to-point keyframes. So the progression from here to here is a one-to-one progression, right? There's no natural movement. Think about a car. When you accelerate in a car, you're starting from 0 and you're gradually ramping up your speed to like get on the interstate or something to 65 miles an hour. Well, it's not a linear progression. You're starting slow, and as your engine picks up speed, you're able to accelerate a little bit faster as you go. Well, right now we're at this boring linear progression. So if I hit function F9 or just F9 on a full keyboard, it turns these into these type of keyframes. These are called easy ease keyframes. Another way to see that or change them, if I undo what I just did, is to select them, right-click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. That creates a nice smooth bell curve ramp. So it starts slow at the beginning, picks up speed in the middle, and then ends slow. So if I show you this, not bad. I will duplicate this layer. I'll show you the difference. And I will shove this over. And what I'm going to do is turn these into the boring keyframes by hitting Control left click. Oops, I'm sorry, Command left click. And we can see the difference. The one on the right is boring linear. It's kind of hard to tell on here, but there's ways to exaggerate this movement down the road that we'll get into. But if you want nice, smoother movement, these easy ease keyframes I almost use it for everything. Very rarely do you want something to come to a stop from full speed. So this is a gradual start, gradual end. Okay, so we have our cool little animation. So let's make this. Let's use the repeater on this to make it really cool. I'm going to hit U to take all those away. I'm going to arrow down so I can get to my add. I want to add a repeater operand, and we'll arrow down and look at our options. It asks us how many copies we want, if there's any offset, and we have a transform repeater for it as well. So let's talk about what this is. This transform repeater is essentially similar to how we animated our text using the text animator. This is asking, from each copy, what do you want to happen? Right now we have 3 copies. So from copy 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, what are we changing? Well, right now the only thing on here is this 100x value. So this is going to add right now 234 x pixels between each object, and it's going to create another one. Well, I don't really want to do that. I want it to be like a radial thing. So let's make 12 copies. And there, I set my position to 0, so they're just stacked on top of each other. And let's rotate them, right? You can rotate these out, which is kind of cool. For perfect math, we can do 360 degrees divided by the amount of copies, so 12, and we get 30. So now we have 30 perfect copies, right? So if we preview this, we get this nice, cool little animation. Pretty sweet. I'm going to turn on motion blur so it looks a little bit better. Pretty cool. And the cool thing is we can go back and easily adjust this. If I go, let's see if I adjust position and stuff. Yeah, I mean you can do a lot of cool stuff. Once you get your starting point made, you can adjust it. So if I want, say, 50 pixels and my x value between each one, you can do that too, and it looks like that. So a lot of cool stuff you can do with this repeater. We'll get more into it and how useful it is. Now, see, that's why my scale. See how you can see them there on the first frame? So if I go back up here to my group, transform, if I create keyframes at scale, I'll scale these all the way down so you can't see anything. Now they're gone. And then I will easily use this as well. Function F9 or just F9 depending on your keyboard. So let's look at that now. Pretty cool, right? But it's not limited to this. I mean, we could change this shape if we want. We can do a lot of stuff after the fact and make this really cool. Like if we want to add some roundness, like if I go to the middle animation, if we want to make them little circles, we can add roundness and make them little circles. You know, we can make them end much bigger if you wanted to, right? We can go back to our transform group and end our position much higher. So if they want to go off the screen, we can move them off the screen for our ending point. Right? Kind of cool. So these are really useful for little bonus kind of small animations to add detail to things. For instance, let's say we want to make a clock face. If I get rid of this shape layer, I'm going to use my pen tool to just draw one. I'm going to bring up my title action safe grid because I want it to be at the top here. I want my 12 hand to be at the very top. So if I go up there, click, let's talk about the pen tool actually really quick. I'm going to undo what I just did. The pen tool is something that you should definitely learn and get used to and master. If I click and just let go, left click and let go, it creates these linear point to point. If I click, hold, and drag, you can now curve this this pen tool. So this tool we can use for creating masks, for creating shapes. We can close this off and it becomes a full shape if we want it to be. It's super useful, and honestly, for live action stuff, if you're making any tweaking, wire removal, stuff like that, you'll use it all the time. So I want to make my clock, so let's, sorry, I'm just extending this layer. If I go to my shape layer, I've got my pen selected. I want to create one little tick up here, which is fine. And let's go to my repeater. So I've got my contents. It gives me my shape. It already gave me a fill and a stroke. I probably don't need my fill, so I'm going to get rid of that. But it gives me a stroke, and it gives me my transform shape as well. So let's go to my repeater. And let's make our 12 copies. And we'll go arrow down on our transform. We'll take away this position because we want it to be centered. And we will do rotation of 360 divided by 12 again, so 30. And now we have these nice little ticks, all perfectly placed, right? So let's animate them on. Under our repeater, we could go by rotation, so we could animate these guys in. We'll go ahead 20 frames here and create another keyframe. And we'll start at 0, and all of a sudden, now they're all flying in, right? Turn motion blur on. They're all flying in. I'll add easy ease this, function F9, and now they're all coming in. Pretty cool, right? Again, a cool little added thing that I think is really neat. So let's add to this, right? Let's create a new shape layer. Let's do a arrow down, and we'll do an ellipse, and we will give it a stroke. And we want our stroke to be really thick, and we want our size to fill up this top part, right? So you want to make it thicker, and I'll size this down. Okay, so let's do that. Pretty neat. Let's talk about another really cool operand, and that is trim paths. I'm going to click trim paths, and we only have start, offset, and end, and trim multiple shapes simultaneous. This is really cool because this allows you to animate on around the path of your object. So this is the starting point of our object, and then our ending point's right next to it here. So if we animate our end, we can bring our end to 0. Consider this point to the left, like this is the start. We'll go all the way around in our end. Well, our end is at 100%, which means it's where it ends up. If we animate this down to 0, it's going to bring it all the way back and start here. So if we bring this down to 0, and I'm going to hit U so we can match these up, see where our rotation ends. I'll hold shift and snap to this keyframe right here. And I will create a keyframe at the end and a keyframe at the beginning. I want it to start at 0 and end at 100. Okay, so, and I will easy ease that by doing function F9. And now let's see it, right? Pretty cool. Might be a little fast. I'm going to slow it down just a hair. Pretty neat. So let's do this. Let's copy this, and we will let's see if we add a second ellipse. Will it follow the same? Yeah, it will. So if we add another ellipse to this trim pass will continue with it. So if we wanted to add a bit more complexity, we could add ellipse, change this size a bit, maybe to like the middle. We'll go to our stroke, bring our stroke width down. Oh, this is going to affect everything. So you probably don't want to do that then. Yeah, that might get too weird. So let's do this. Let's just duplicate this layer by hitting Command D or Apple D. So we just have 2 layers right on top of each other. Let's go and scale this, or bring the stroke width down, and let's bring our object size down, right? Now we have 2 little things, right? So rather than have them all come in at the exact same time like this, let's offset them a little bit. I'm going to select all my layers and kind of just get rid of all of my stuff. Let's offset these so they animate in like one at a time. The way we do that is just grab these, pull them back a few frames, and kind of stagger them like that. Right, and now we have this nice little staggered animation. That's really cool. So it's pretty neat. It's a really cool, easy way to create some more intricate, detailed stuff. Just because it's annoying, I'm going to bring my size on this down so it doesn't look so silly. So yeah, that's the repeater. That's trim paths. Let's talk really quick about just using line trim paths, because I use this all the time. Let's say I want to highlight something from point to point, and I want this line to grow. The trim paths is super easy on this. If you go to Add Trim Paths, we can select this and just animate our ending point here. So if I create a keyframe at the end, or for our endpoint, and we start at 0 and end on end, and we ease this. Now our line, oops, I think I accidentally had those both selected. We want to end at 100%. Now our line animates on, right? Pretty cool. So how can we make this cool? And I use this in my homework, and this is something that, in my homework example, and something I want you guys to do as well. I want to create like a little explodey line, right? So let's create a new one. I'm just going to have it go right up, straight up, right? So here's my little explodey line, and we want to add our trim paths to this. Okay, trim paths. And we want to animate both our start and our end, because we want eventually our starting point to go with it and finish off the animation. So I'm going to create 2 keyframes on both spots, on my start and my end. I know I want them to end together at 100%. I want this to end at 100%. So right now, all I have is I'm going to have to change my end to start at 100%, just like we did before. And if I stagger this starting point, now this ending spot right here, it'll let this, if I bring this out a bit, it'll let this ending point move, give it a little bit of time, and then try to catch up with it, right? See that? So if I ease these, this is what we're going to get. Okay, I might speed it up just a hair. Kind of tighten those up. Okay, looks pretty cool. So let's make this even cooler. I'm going to trim this, go to my ending point where it's completely animated out. I'm going to trim this down. So now I can see exactly how long this layer is, which is helpful. And I'm going to add a repeater. Come down and look at it. So it gives me my 3 copies, which is fine. If I go to my transform properties, it still does that. I'm going to bring this in the middle so I can see what it's doing here. It still gives me the position, which I don't really want. I'm going to bring that down. I just want to rotate them a bit, kind of have them explode from that little point. You can see that it's rotating around this center point right here, right? Which is fine. If we want that to be the point where they come out of, then that works. The only other thing I can see is if we want to adjust our scale. So if we scale this down, will that do what I want it to? No, it doesn't. That's going to scale each one down after each copy. So let's go back here. I need these to be scaled to start from, essentially, and they kind of are, but they just start kind of awkwardly here, kind of too thick. So let's do this. Let's go to my stroke. Let's keyframe my stroke width. We'll give it a few frames like here, and we'll start at 0. That way they're animating on here. I'll ease those. That may be a bit too much time. That seems to work a little bit better. If I zoom out here, it's so small it'll look better when I zoom out. All right, so that's a little cool effect. If something's moving, it's it's a little hit point, which is kind of fun. We can add more copies of it if we want to. We'll have to bring our rotation back down a bit. Pretty cool. It almost looks like a little firework. If we were to do scale, like let's say we want to scale it down by 10% after each one, you can kind of see what that's going to do. Right? Each one gets 10% smaller as it goes, which is kind of neat. Maybe let's half that, which is kind of fun. Maybe if we change our opacity, if we bring this ending opacity down, You know, we could do that. We can have our scale. Let's see. There's lots of cool stuff we can play with here. So you know, play with this. It's a cool little tool, but there's a little easy animation we made, and not very much time at all. So really take a peek at this tool. It comes in handy. I use it all the time. Really quick before we sign out, let's talk about parenting because you're going to do this in your homework. When you're creating your phones, if I go to New, Shape Layer, I want to create a rounded rectangle. Do rectangle. I will give it some fill. I want it to be white. That's fine. So if this is going to be the base of my phone, if you click this constraint, uncheck the constrained proportions, now we can bring this x-axis up. I'm going to take my action safe off so we can see this. You can bring your y-axis up, excuse me, and change this separately. So let's say that's about the rough shape of my phone. If I give this some roundness, that looks to be about the size of a phone, right? So that's good for the outer layer. If I duplicate this by hitting Apple D and I hit UU, that'll bring up everything I've changed in these layers. So I want to change my color back to the same color that the background is. My color picker has not been working. I don't know what the deal is. So I copy the background, and I'm going to size this down. Oops, I'm sorry. I want to constrain. These are my dimensions. I want to keep these. I'm going to size this down from that, right? So this is kind of the screen of my phone, right? I'm gonna lock my background so I stop clicking on it. So this is the screen of my phone. Well, let's say I want if I rename this base and I rename this screen, so it can kind of help us see this. If I rotate this base, I want my screen to come along with it. The way we do that is parenting. You see parenting options here. If you don't, toggle switches and modes will change where these are. Sometimes it doesn't show. So parenting is really cool. If I want my screen to take its movement cues from my base, you can either click on this parent and select base. So when I rotate my base, now it comes along with it. Or if I go back to none, you can take this pick tool and just go and select it that way. Okay, so now when this base rotates, when this base moves, it does it with it. But I can still animate this separately, right? I can still do whatever I want on here. So when you're animating your phone and the entire phone rotates and stuff like that, you should be parenting those little items, like say you have buttons and everything, to the base that's moving. So rather than animating each piece individually, you only animate one and make sure everything's parented to it, right? So keep in mind that sometimes when something's parented to them, you might not want to take its cues from it, so you kind of have to work out your hierarchy of how you want it to work, but that's usually the best way to do it. So focus this week on easing keyframes by hitting function F9 or just F9 depending on your keyboard. Take a look at trim paths and repeater tools. They're very cool. You can create some really neat stuff with them. And get into parenting a little bit for your homework. Parent one object to another, move it around, see how it affects it, stuff like that. Make sure you're using motion blur on your layers, which is very, very important. I also wanted to talk about, so my base, under contents, my rectangle path, when I uncheck this, keep in mind, I'm just going to get rid of this for now. On my base, my size, when I uncheck my constrained proportions, if I create a keyframe here, let's say this is the ending point of my phone, I'll create a keyframe at the end because this is how I know I want it to end. I'm going to animate backwards. So I'll go back a little bit. I'll change my x-axis to go way, way down maybe. We'll do like there. That works. And then let me get rid of this very first keyframe. Oops. And then after that, maybe I want my x-axis to come in. And then before that, maybe I want everything to be zeroed out, right? So here's what it's going to look like. So I'll ease that. I'm going to bring these a little bit closer together. And what does that look like? Pretty cool, right? So keep in mind, you can do some really cool stuff just with the size of shape layers. It's pretty darn neat. So if we want to create our screen, let's do. I'll just duplicate this. I'm gonna name this screen. We'll go into our contents. Actually, let's just hit UU. UU. Change our color. Select the same background color. And our size animation still here. Got slid back somehow. I'm going to get rid of these keyframes. I'm going to scale this down just a bit. And I'm going to parent this to my base. So my size isn't going with it, right? These values aren't going with it. The only thing that goes with it are what's in our transform. So our position, anchor point, scale, rotation, opacity. These attributes do not go with parenting. So I'm gonna have to animate this on with it, right? So this is my find ending point. I'll create a keyframe of my size here. And let's see, we need to animate this down probably with it. Right, that's good. So we'll zero this out. So I'm just kind of following along with where these keyframes are, holding shift to align with them, creating kind of good points with it. So let's see what that looks like. Pretty cool, yeah? So play around with that. It's a fun way. Make sure that you're holding shift to make sure these keyframes are exactly aligned. It's very important. If you don't, let's say these are off a little bit, and then if I preview that, it just doesn't look as good. It looks weird. Things get honky. Make sure when you're dragging or sliding anything, hold shift, align them to these keyframes, and you'll be good to go, right? If you have any questions, as always, call me, email me, and I would be happy to help you and answer them. I will be out of town Thursday, Friday on a shoot, but feel free to email me and I'll get back to you. So thanks for watching, guys. Hope you have a good week, and I will see you next Wednesday.